The iron gates of Valdris Castle groaned open after a century of silence, their hinges protesting against time and neglect, as General Cassius Nightfall rode through them for the first time in 100 years. His black destrier's hooves echoed against cobblestones that had once been familiar, now cracked and overgrown with weeds that spoke of a kingdom changed beyond recognition. Behind him rode the remnants of his army, vampires who had followed him into the Shadowlands War as young soldiers and returned as battle-hardened veterans, their faces bearing scars that would never heal and eyes that had seen too much death. They were victorious, but victory felt hollow when measured against the cost of a century lost. Cassius dismounted before the castle steps, his movement still carrying the fluid grace that had made him legendary on the battlefield, though now there was a weariness to his bearing that hadn't existed when he'd first donned his general's armor. At 6 feet 4 inches, with midnight black hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, he had always commanded attention. Now, after 100 years of war, he commanded something more dangerous, respect born of fear. "My lord," Captain Marcus approached, his voice carefully neutral. "The king awaits you in the throne room." King Aldrich Valdris, nephew to the king who had sent Cassius to war, now ruler in his own right. Cassius had known him as a boy of 12, all gangly limbs and hero worship. Now he would be a man of over a century, aged by the weight of a crown that had never been meant for him. The throne room was both exactly as Cassius remembered and completely transformed. The same soaring arches and stained glass windows, the same tapestries depicting centuries of vampire victories, but where once the space had buzzed with the energy of a thriving court, now it felt subdued, almost melancholy. King Aldrich sat upon the obsidian throne, and Cassius was struck by how much the boy had changed. His hair was silver now, his face lined with the weight of difficult decisions, but his eyes still held the intelligence that had marked him even as a child. "Uncle Cassius," Aldrich said, rising from the throne with obvious emotion. "Welcome home." The title hit Cassius like a physical blow. Uncle, not by blood, but by the bonds of loyalty and affection that had once tied him to the royal family. He had been more than just a general. He had been a friend, a mentor, a man who had helped raise the boy who now wore the crown. "Your Majesty," Cassius replied, offering the formal bow due to a king, though his heart rebelled against the distance it implied. "None of that," Aldrich said, stepping down from the throne to embrace him. "Your family, Cassius. You always have been." The embrace was warm, genuine, but Cassius could feel the tension beneath it. Something was wrong. He could sense it in the way the courtiers avoided his eyes, in the careful neutrality of their expressions, in the way Aldrich himself seemed to be bracing for an unpleasant conversation. "The war is over," Cassius said as they separated. "The Shadowlands have been pacified, their armies scattered. The threat to our borders is ended. Yes, we received your dispatches. A century of fighting, but you've secured our realm's safety for generations to come." Aldrich's smile was proud but strained, though I confess we had begun to fear you might never return. The enemy proved more resilient than anticipated. What should have been a 10-year campaign became something far longer. Cassius studied the king's face, noting the careful way he avoided certain topics. "But I kept my word. I returned victorious, ready to claim the reward promised to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Cassius watched as Aldrich's expression shifted from welcome to something that might have been pity, and he felt the first cold fingers of dread creeping up his spine. "Cassius," Aldrich said gently, "perhaps we should speak privately." They retired to the king's study, a smaller chamber lined with books and maps, warmed by a fire that cast dancing shadows on the walls. It was here that Cassius had often found the old king in his final years, planning strategies and discussing the future of the realm. "Tell me," Cassius said without preamble, "what has happened to Lady Alara?" Aldrich poured 2 glasses of wine, his movements deliberate and careful. "How much do you know of what has transpired in your absence?" "Very little. Communication with the homeland was difficult during the later years of the campaign. I received word of your uncle's death, of your coronation, but little else." Cassius accepted the wine but didn't drink. "I know that Lady Alara was to wait for my return, as we agreed before my departure." "Cassius," Aldrich began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to continue. "She's dead." The words came out flat, emotionless, though inside Cassius felt something vital begin to crumble. When? How? No, she's not dead. But, Aldrich took a deep breath. She's married. The wine glass shattered in Cassius's grip, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Blood welled from the cuts on his palm, but he barely noticed. Married? 20 years ago? We thought you were dead, Cassius. No word for decades, no sign that you or your army still lived. The realm needed alliances, needed stability. And Ilara, Aldrich's voice trailed off. Who? The word came out as a growl, and Cassius saw Aldrich flinch at the barely controlled violence in his tone. King Richard of Astoria. The name hit Cassius like a sword to the chest. Astoria, the very kingdom whose aggression had necessitated the Shadowlands campaign in the first place. The realm they had fought to keep from invading Valdris's borders. She married our enemy? Our former enemy. The marriage was part of a peace treaty, Cassius. It ended the border conflicts, secured trade agreements, prevented a war that would have devastated both kingdoms. Aldrich set down his own wine, untouched. It was a political necessity. And now she's Queen Ilara of Astoria. Richard died 5 years ago, and she rules as regent for her son. Cassius turned away, staring into the fire as he tried to process this information. Ilara, his Ilara, the woman who had promised to wait for him, who had sworn her love was eternal, was now the queen of their former enemies. Worse, she was the mother of their heir, the woman whose very existence maintained the peace between their kingdoms. I need to see her. Cassius, I don't think that's wise. I need to see her. The words carried the weight of command, the authority of a man who had led armies for a century. Arrange it. Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. But Cassius, things are not as simple as they once were. The peace between our kingdoms is fragile, dependent on careful diplomacy and mutual respect. Ilara's position as Queen Regent is crucial to maintaining that balance. Are you telling me to forget her? To pretend that a century of war was fought for nothing? I'm telling you that the world has changed. We all have. Aldrich moved to the window, looking out over the castle grounds. The woman you left behind. She's not the same person who will meet you tomorrow. Neither am I. The meeting was arranged for the next evening, in the neutral territory of Thornfield Abbey, a monastery that sat on the border between the two kingdoms, serving pilgrims and travelers from both realms. Cassius rode there alone, despite Marcus's protests, needing the solitude to prepare himself for what was to come. The abbey was ancient, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Cassius had been here before long ago, when he was young and the world seemed full of endless possibilities. Now it felt like a place caught between past and present, neither fully belonging to either. She was waiting for him in the abbey's garden, standing beside a fountain that reflected the evening stars. For a moment Cassius could only stare, his breath caught in his throat. Ilara was still beautiful, perhaps more so than when he'd left her. The girl of 20 had become a woman of extraordinary grace and dignity. Her golden hair was now touched with silver at the temples, and there were lines around her blue eyes that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. She wore a simple blue gown that emphasized her elegance without ostentation, and around her throat was a silver pendant he didn't recognize. Cassius. Her voice was exactly as he remembered, warm, melodious, with just a hint of the accent that marked her noble birth. Ilara. He dismounted and approached slowly, as if she might vanish if he moved too quickly. You look radiant. You look tired. Her eyes moved over his face, taking in the changes that a century of war had wrought. And older. War ages a man, even one of my kind. Yes, I imagine it does. She gestured to a stone bench beside the fountain. Shall we sit? We have much to discuss. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 100 years between them. Cassius found himself studying her profile, noting the small changes that time had brought, the slight deepening of the lines around her eyes, the way she held herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. I thought you were dead, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. Aldrich explained the circumstances. Do you? Do you really understand what it was like? Waiting year after year for word that never came, watching the other wives and sweethearts receive news of their men while I heard nothing? Do you understand what it was like to finally accept that the man I loved was never coming home? The pain in her voice was like a knife to his heart. Ilara, I waited 15 years, Cassius. 15 years of refusing every suitor, every political alliance, every chance at happiness because I believed in a promise made by a man who might already be dust. Her hands clenched in her lap. When Richard's proposal came, when the council made it clear that the marriage was necessary to prevent a war that would have killed thousands, I had to choose between a ghost and the living. I'm not a ghost. Aren't you? She turned to face him fully, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. The man I loved was young, idealistic, full of dreams about the future we would build together. That man has been gone for a century. What came back is a stranger wearing his face. The words stung because they held a grain of truth. The man who had left for war had been different, younger, more optimistic, believing that victory could be achieved quickly and cleanly. The man who had returned had seen too much death, made too many impossible choices, carried too much blood on his hands. Perhaps you're right, he said quietly. Perhaps we're both different people now, but that doesn't change what was between us, doesn't it? Cassius, I'm not the girl who promised to wait for you. I'm a queen now, a mother, a woman who has built a life and responsibilities that extend far beyond my own desires. A mother. The words felt strange on his tongue. Aldrich mentioned you have a son. Something flickered across her expression, too quickly for him to identify, but it sent a chill down his spine. Yes, Prince Alexander. He's everything to me. And his father? Did you love him? Ilara was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fountain's depths. Richard was a good man, kind, honorable, devoted to his people. I learned to care for him, to respect him. But love? She shook her head. No, I gave my heart to a vampire general a century ago, and I never got it back. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Cassius felt his own heart racing, hope and despair warring in his chest. Then come with me, he said urgently. Leave Astoria, leave the crown, leave all of it behind. We can start again, somewhere far from politics and duty and the weight of kingdoms. And my son, would you have me abandon him? Bring him. I would raise him as my own. Love him as I love you. You don't understand. Ilara stood abruptly, pacing to the fountain's edge. Alexander isn't just Richard's heir. He's the symbol of the peace between our kingdoms. His very existence prevents war. If I were to leave, if I were to take him from Astoria, there would be war, Cassius finished, understanding flooding through him. You're not just a queen, you're a hostage to peace. I'm a guardian of it. There's a difference. Is there? Ilara, you can't sacrifice your entire life for politics, can't I? Isn't that exactly what you did? You sacrificed a century for duty, for the good of the realm. How is my choice any different? The parallel was uncomfortable, too close to the truth for Cassius to easily dismiss. But there was a crucial difference that she didn't seem to understand. I fought for 100 years believing I was coming home to you. Every battle, every loss, every moment when I thought I might not survive. I endured it all because I knew you were waiting for me. That promise, that hope, was what kept me alive, and I honored that promise for 15 years. But Cassius, I couldn't wait forever. I had to choose between a memory and a future. And now? What would you choose now? She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw the same conflict that was tearing him apart. It doesn't matter what I would choose. Some choices can't be unmade. Every choice can be unmade. It's just a matter of what you're willing to sacrifice. And what would you have me sacrifice? My son's future? The peace between our kingdoms? The lives of thousands of people who would die in the war that would surely follow? I would have you choose love over duty, happiness over obligation. I would have you choose us. There is no us anymore, Cassius. There's only what was, and what is, and what must be. The finality in her voice was like a death knell, but Cassius refused to accept it. I don't believe that, I can't believe that. Then you're still the idealistic young man who left for war, despite everything you've seen and done. Ilara moved toward the garden's entrance, clearly preparing to leave. Some things are lost forever, Cassius. Some promises can't be kept. Ilara, wait. He caught her arm gently, feeling the warmth of her skin through the fabric of her gown. At least tell me this, do you still love me? She looked up at him, and for a moment her careful composure cracked, revealing the pain beneath. That's the cruelest question you could ask. But do you? Yes, she whispered, and the word was like a sword through his heart. God help me, yes. I've loved you through 20 years of marriage to another man, through raising a child who will never know his true father, through every day and night of pretending that my heart wasn't buried in a grave that turned out to be empty. His true father? The words hit Cassius like a physical blow. What did you say? Alara's face went white, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could take back the words. I didn't mean... Alara. His voice was deadly quiet, the tone he'd used on battlefields when ordering executions. What did you mean about Alexander's true father? Nothing. I misspoke. Don't lie to me. Not now, not about this. He stepped closer, his storm-gray eyes boring into hers. Is Alexander my son? The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of revelation. Alara's shoulders sagged as if she were carrying an unbearable burden. Yes, she whispered finally. He's yours. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Cassius felt his knees go weak, his carefully maintained composure crumbling like a castle built on sand. How? The night before you left for war, we couldn't help ourselves. We knew it might be years before we saw each other again, and Her voice trailed off, but he remembered. God, how could he forget? The passion, the desperate need to connect before duty tore them apart. The promises whispered in the darkness. You were pregnant when I left. I didn't know. Not until weeks later when you were already gone and it was too late to call you back. Tears were flowing freely down her cheeks now. I was terrified, Cassius. Unmarried, pregnant with a vampire's child, facing scandal and ruin. When Richard's proposal came, when he offered to marry me despite my condition and claim the child as his own, you let another man raise my son. The words came out flat, emotionless, though inside Cassius felt like he was being torn apart. I gave my son a legitimate name, a crown, a future. I gave him everything you couldn't. I could have given him a father. You could have given him a father who was never there, who was always at war, always in danger. Richard gave him stability, love, a kingdom to inherit. Alara's voice was fierce now, defensive. I made the best choice I could with the options I had. And now, does he know? No, and he never can. The words were sharp, final. Alexander believes Richard was his father, and that's how it must remain. He's the rightful heir to Astoria's throne, the symbol of peace between our kingdoms. If the truth came out, there would be questions about his legitimacy, about his right to rule. Cassius understood the political implications, even as his heart rebelled against them. The peace treaty would be void. Exactly. So you see why this conversation can never happen again? Why we can never... I want to see him. Cassius, no. It's too dangerous. I want to see my son. The words carried the weight of command, the authority of a man who had never been denied. Arrange it. I can't. The risk... I have spent 100 years fighting for a future I thought included you and the family we would build together. I have just learned that I have a son who has grown to manhood without ever knowing his father. I will see him, Alara. The only question is whether you help me do it safely or I find another way. She stared at him for a long moment, clearly weighing the threat against the alternatives. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. There's a diplomatic reception tomorrow night, a celebration of the anniversary of the peace treaty. You could attend as part of King Aldrich's delegation. And Alexander will be there. He'll be presented to the court as the heir apparent. It's his 18th birthday celebration as well. 18. His son was 18 years old, a man grown, and Cassius had missed every moment of his childhood. The thought was almost unbearable. I'll be there, he said. Cassius. Alara's voice was soft, pleading. Promise me you won't do anything to endanger him. Whatever you think of my choices, whatever anger you feel toward me, don't let it hurt Alexander. He's innocent in all of this. He's my son, Cassius said simply. I would die before I let harm come to him. The diplomatic reception was held in Astoria's royal palace, a magnificent structure of white marble and soaring towers that spoke of wealth and power. Cassius arrived as part of King Aldrich's delegation, his formal court attire doing little to disguise the predatory grace that marked him as a warrior. The great hall was filled with nobles from both kingdoms, their conversations a careful dance of diplomacy and veiled threats. Cassius moved through the crowd like a shadow, his attention focused entirely on finding his son. He spotted Alara first, resplendent in a gown of royal blue silk. her golden hair crowned with a circlet of sapphires. She was speaking with a group of Asturian nobles, her manner gracious and confident, every inch the queen. But Cassius could see the tension in her posture, the way her eyes kept scanning the crowd as if looking for threats. Then he saw him. Prince Alexander stood near the throne, accepting congratulations from a steady stream of well-wishers. He was tall, nearly as tall as Cassius himself, with dark hair and strong features that were unmistakably familiar. But it was his eyes that stopped Cassius's heart. Storm gray eyes exactly like his own. "Magnificent, isn't he?" The voice came from beside him, and Cassius turned to see an elderly Asturian lord studying him with interest. "The prince, I mean. The very image of his late father, wouldn't you say?" Cassius managed a non-committal sound, not trusting himself to speak. The man was wrong, of course. Alexander looked nothing like the portraits of King Richard that adorned the palace walls. He looked like a nightfall, like the vampire general who had sired him in a moment of desperate passion. "General Nightfall, isn't it?" the lord continued. "I'm Lord Pemberton, Chancellor of the Exchequer. We're honored to have such a distinguished warrior at our celebration." "The honor is mine," Cassius replied automatically, his attention still fixed on Alexander. "The prince has heard stories of your campaigns, you know. He's quite fascinated by military strategy, always asking questions about tactics and logistics. Perhaps you might speak with him later." The suggestion was like a gift from the gods. "I would be delighted." The opportunity came an hour later, when Alexander stepped away from the crowd to examine a display of ancient weapons mounted on the wall. Cassius approached slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Impressive collection," he said, stopping beside the young man. Alexander looked up and Cassius felt his breath catch. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Not just the eyes, but the shape of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, even the slight tilt of his head when he was thinking. "General Nightfall," Alexander said, offering a respectful bow. "I've heard remarkable things about your campaigns in the Shadowlands." "Your Highness." Cassius returned the bow, fighting to keep his voice steady. "And I've heard remarkable things about your kingdom's prosperity under your mother's regency." "She's an extraordinary woman," Alexander said with obvious affection, "though I suspect she'll be relieved when I come of age and can take on more of the burden of rule." "You're eager to be king?" "I'm eager to serve my people. The crown is a responsibility, not a privilege." Alexander's expression grew serious. "My father, King Richard, taught me that a ruler's first duty is always to those he governs." The words were spoken with such conviction that Cassius felt a surge of pride. Whatever else had happened, Ilara had raised their son to be a man of honor and principle. Wise words. "And what of military matters? I'm told you have an interest in strategy." Alexander's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, I've studied every major campaign of the last century, including yours. The Battle of Shadowmere was particularly brilliant, the way you used the terrain to turn the enemy's superior numbers against them." They talked for nearly an hour, discussing tactics and strategy, the challenges of command, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. Cassius found himself amazed by his son's intelligence and insight, by the thoughtful questions he asked and the mature way he considered complex problems. "You know," Alexander said as their conversation wound down, "I've always wondered what it would be like to have a father who was a warrior. King Richard was a good man, but he was more of a scholar than a soldier." The wistful note in his voice was like a dagger to Cassius's heart. "I'm sure he taught you valuable lessons nonetheless." "Oh, he did. But sometimes I wonder about the father I never knew. My birth father, I mean. Mother doesn't speak of him much, only that he died before I was born." Cassius felt the world tilt around him. "Your birth father? I know I'm not Richard's biological son," Alexander said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "I've always known, really. The timing never quite worked out, and I looked nothing like him. But he claimed me as his own, gave me his name and his love. In every way that matters, he was my father." "And you've never wondered about your biological father?" "Of course I have. But Mother made it clear that some questions are too painful to answer, so I stopped asking." Alexander's expression grew thoughtful, though I've always imagined he must have been a warrior of some kind, someone brave and honorable, worthy of my mother's love. The simple faith in those words nearly brought Cassius to his knees. Here was his son, a young man of intelligence and honor, speaking of a father he'd never known with respect and admiration. It was more than Cassius had dared to hope for. "I'm sure he would be very proud of the man you've become," Cassius said, his voice rough with emotion. "Do you really think so?" "I know so." Before Alexander could respond, a commotion near the throne drew their attention. Queen Alara was speaking urgently with one of her advisors, her face pale with concern. The advisor nodded and hurried away, and Alara's eyes swept the crowd until they found Cassius. The look she gave him was one of pure terror. "Excuse me, Your Highness," Cassius said, bowing quickly. "I believe I'm needed elsewhere." He made his way through the crowd to Alara's side, noting how the nobles around her seemed tense and worried. "What's happened?" he asked quietly. "Border incident," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. "Raiders from the Northlands have attacked one of our frontier settlements. The council is demanding immediate military response. And some of them are suggesting that this proves the peace treaty has made us weak, that we need to return to the old ways of strength through conquest." Her eyes met his. "They're calling for war, Cassius. War with Valdris." The implications hit him like a physical blow. If Astoria went to war with Valdris, everything would change. The careful balance that had maintained peace for 20 years would be shattered, and Alexander, his son, would be expected to lead his kingdom's armies against his own father's people. How much support do they have? Enough to be dangerous. The younger nobles especially are eager to prove themselves in battle. They see the peace as their father's weakness rather than wisdom. And Alexander? What does he think? He's young, idealistic. He believes in honor and justice, but he's never seen the true cost of war. Alara's voice dropped to a whisper. "If this escalates, if the council forces his hand, he'll do what he believes is right for his kingdom, even if it means fighting against yours." "Against mine," Cassius repeated, the bitter irony not lost on him. "My son, leading armies against the kingdom I've spent my life defending. You see why I couldn't tell you? Why this secret had to be kept?" Alara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "The peace between our kingdoms is fragile enough, without adding the complication of a vampire general's bastard son on Astoria's throne." "He's not a bastard," Cassius said fiercely. "He's my son and he's a prince. Nothing else matters. Everything else matters. His legitimacy, his right to rule, the stability of both our kingdoms, it all hangs in the balance." Before Cassius could respond, Alexander approached them, his young face grave with concern. "Mother, I've been speaking with the council. They want to convene an emergency session to discuss the border situation." "I know. We'll meet with them shortly. Some of them are talking about war," Alexander said, his voice troubled. "They say the Northland raids are a sign that our neighbors see us as weak, that we need to demonstrate our strength." "And what do you think?" Alara asked gently. "I think war should always be the last resort, not the first. But if our people are being attacked, if our sovereignty is being challenged..." He looked between his mother and Cassius, clearly struggling with the weight of decision. "I suppose I need to understand all the options." "Very wise," Cassius said, meaning it. "A good ruler considers every possibility before choosing a course of action." "Thank you, General. Your perspective would be valuable in the council meeting if you're willing to share it." Cassius felt Alara's sharp intake of breath, saw the panic in her eyes. The last thing she wanted was for him to be involved in Astoria's military planning, especially if it might lead to conflict with Valdris. "I'm honored by the invitation, Your Highness, but as a representative of King Aldrich, it would be inappropriate for me to participate in your internal deliberations." "Of course, you're right. But perhaps afterward you might be willing to discuss the situation informally? I value the wisdom of experienced commanders." "Perhaps," Cassius agreed, though he could feel Alara's disapproval radiating from beside him. As Alexander excused himself to prepare for the council meeting, Alara grabbed Cassius's arm. "You can't get involved in this," she said urgently. "If you start advising Alexander on military matters, if you influence his decisions, if I help him avoid a war that would devastate both our kingdoms, if you reveal yourself as his father, even inadvertently, Cassius, he's already drawn to you. I can see it in the way he looks at you, the way he seeks your approval. If you spend more time with him, if you let yourself get close to him, what? I might actually get to know my son? I might have the chance to guide him, to share the wisdom I've gained through a century of war. You might destroy everything we've built to protect him." The argument was interrupted by the arrival of King Aldrich and his retinue, their faces grim with the news that had clearly reached them as well. "General," Aldrich said, approaching with obvious relief, "thank God you're here. We need to discuss the situation immediately." "What situation?" Cassius asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The Northland raids were just the beginning. Our scouts report that several border settlements have been attacked, and there are signs that this was coordinated rather than random banditry." Aldrich's expression was grave. "Someone is trying to provoke a conflict between Valdris and Astoria. Who? We're not certain yet, but the attacks were specifically designed to make it appear that Valdris forces were responsible. Weapons left behind bearing our markings, survivors who report seeing vampires among the raiders." Cassius felt his blood turn cold. "False flag operations." "Exactly. Someone wants our kingdoms at war, and they're willing to spill innocent blood to achieve it. The question is who benefits from such a conflict," Ilara said, her political mind already working through the implications. "Several possibilities," Aldrich replied. "The Northland tribes themselves, seeking to weaken both kingdoms through mutual destruction. The Eastern Empire, which has been expanding its influence in the region. Or someone within one of our own kingdoms," Cassius finished, understanding dawning. "Someone who opposes the peace treaty. The thought had occurred to us as well," Aldrich said grimly, "which is why we need to handle this situation very carefully. Any response we make must be measured, diplomatic, designed to preserve the peace rather than escalate toward conflict. And if Astoria's council decides on military action, then we'll have to respond in kind, regardless of our personal preferences." Aldrich's voice was heavy with regret. "I won't let our people be slaughtered to preserve a peace that others have already broken." As the two kings and their advisors continued their urgent discussions, Cassius found himself caught between competing loyalties. His duty to Valdris demanded that he support his king's decisions, even if they led to war. His love for Ilara demanded that he protect the peace she had sacrificed so much to maintain. And his newfound knowledge of Alexander's parentage added another layer of complexity. How could he fight against a kingdom ruled by his own son? The council meeting lasted well into the night, with heated debates about the appropriate response to the border attacks. Cassius observed from the gallery, watching as Alexander listened carefully to each speaker, asking thoughtful questions, and weighing the arguments with a maturity that belied his youth. When the time came for the prince to speak, he rose with quiet dignity, his storm-gray eyes serious as he addressed the assembled nobles. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "we face a choice that will define our kingdom for generations to come. We can respond to these attacks with immediate military action, demonstrating our strength, but risking a war that could devastate both our realm and our neighbors. Or we can pursue a more measured approach, seeking to identify the true perpetrators while maintaining the peace that has brought our people 20 years of prosperity." "Your Highness," interrupted Lord Blackwood, one of the more hawkish nobles, "with respect, measured approaches are often seen as weakness by our enemies. If we don't respond decisively to these attacks, we invite further aggression. And if we respond too decisively, my lord, we may find ourselves fighting a war against the wrong enemy, while the true perpetrators laugh from the shadows." Alexander's response was calm but firm. "I propose that we increase patrols along our borders, strengthen our defenses, and work with King Aldrich's representatives to investigate these attacks thoroughly. If we discover that Valdris was indeed responsible, then we can consider military action. But if we find that we've been manipulated into conflict by a third party, we'll have preserved the peace and identified the real threat." The debate continued for another hour, but Cassius could see that Alexander's words had swayed many of the undecided nobles. The prince's combination of caution and strength, his willingness to consider all possibilities before acting, reminded Cassius painfully of himself at that age. When the council finally voted, it was by a narrow margin in favor of Alexander's proposal. The kingdom would strengthen its defenses and investigate the attacks, but would not immediately declare war on Valdris. As the nobles filed out of the chamber, Cassius made his way down to the main floor, where Alexander was speaking quietly with his mother. "Your Highness," Cassius said, approaching with genuine admiration, "that was masterfully handled. You showed wisdom beyond your years." "Thank you, General. Though I confess I'm not entirely certain I made the right choice. The pressure to act decisively was considerable. Leadership often means choosing the difficult path over the easy one." You chose to think rather than react, to seek truth rather than accept convenient explanations. Those are the qualities of a great king. Alexander's face flushed with pleasure at the praise. You really think so? I know so. Your people are fortunate to have you as their future king. If I live long enough to claim the throne, Alexander said with a rueful smile. Some of the nobles were quite vocal about their displeasure with my decision. Let them grumble. History will vindicate your choice, especially if we can identify the real perpetrators of these attacks. We? Alexander's eyebrows rose. Are you offering to help with the investigation? Cassius glanced at Alara, seeing the warning in her eyes, but pressed on anyway. If both kingdoms are working together to solve this mystery, it only makes sense for our investigators to coordinate their efforts. An excellent point. Mother, what do you think? Alara was trapped, unable to object, without seeming to oppose cooperation between the kingdoms. If King Aldrich agrees to such an arrangement, I suppose it could be beneficial. Then it's settled, Alexander said with satisfaction. General, I look forward to working with you to get to the bottom of this mystery. As they shook hands, Cassius felt a surge of emotion that nearly overwhelmed him. This was his son, intelligent, principled, brave, and for the first time in 18 years they would be working together toward a common goal. It wasn't the relationship he had dreamed of, but it was a beginning. The investigation began the next morning, with teams of investigators from both kingdoms examining the attack sites and interviewing survivors. Cassius found himself working closely with Alexander, their shared military background creating an easy rapport that made the collaboration both productive and personally rewarding. The attack patterns are definitely coordinated, Alexander observed as they studied maps of the affected areas. Too precise to be random banditry, too well planned to be spontaneous raids. Agreed. And the weapons left behind are interesting. Valdris military issue, but from units that were disbanded years ago. Cassius pointed to the relevant reports. Someone went to considerable trouble to obtain authentic equipment, or someone had access to old armory stores, Alexander suggested, which implies inside knowledge of Valdris military organization. Or historian. The attacks were timed to coincide with your birthday celebration, when both kingdoms would have representatives in the same location. That suggests knowledge of court schedules and diplomatic protocols. They worked together for hours, their investigation revealing a web of evidence that pointed to a conspiracy involving elements from both kingdoms. The more they uncovered, the more impressed Cassius became with his son's analytical mind and attention to detail. You have a gift for this, he told Alexander as they reviewed witness statements. The ability to see patterns, to think like your enemy, those are rare talents. I had good teachers, Alexander replied. My mother insisted I study not just history and politics, but strategy and tactics as well. She said a king who doesn't understand war is a king who can't preserve peace. Wise advice. She's a remarkable woman. I know some people question a female regent, but she's proven herself time and again. The kingdom has prospered under her rule. You're very close to her. She's all the family I have left. My father, King Richard, died when I was 13, and my mother has been both parent and mentor ever since. Alexander's expression grew thoughtful. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to have a father figure during these past years. Someone to teach me about leadership, about the weight of command. The wistful note in his voice was like a knife to Cassius's heart. I'm sure King Richard left you with valuable lessons. He did, but, well, he was more of a scholar than a warrior. A good man, but not someone who understood the darker aspects of rule, the choices that keep you awake at night, the decisions that haunt you for years afterward. And you think a warrior would understand those things better? I think someone who's faced life and death decisions, who's carried the responsibility for other people's lives, would understand the burden of command in a way that a scholar couldn't. Cassius felt tears prick at his eyes. His son was describing exactly the kind of relationship he had dreamed of having with him. Mentor and student, father and son, sharing the hard-won wisdom of experience. Perhaps, he said carefully, you might find such a mentor among your mother's advisors, or among the visiting dignitaries. Perhaps, Alexander agreed, but his eyes were fixed on Cassius with an intensity that suggested he had already found what he was looking for. Their investigation continued for several days, with the evidence pointing increasingly toward a conspiracy designed to provoke war between the kingdoms. But it was on the fourth day that they made the breakthrough that changed everything. "General," Alexander called out as Cassius entered the makeshift command center they had established. "We've found something." He was holding a letter, his face pale with shock and anger. One of the survivors remembered seeing this fall from a raider's pack. "We just finished translating it." Cassius took the letter, his own expression darkening as he read. It was written in code, but the meaning was clear enough. Detailed instructions for the attacks, including specific targets and timing, all designed to maximize the political impact. "Who sent it?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Lord Blackwood," Alexander said, his voice tight with betrayal. "The same man who argued most forcefully for immediate military action in the council meeting. He's been planning this for months," Cassius realized, studying the letter's date. "The attacks, the evidence pointing to Valdris, the pressure for war, it's all been orchestrated. But why? What does he gain from a war between our kingdoms?" "Power," Cassius said grimly. "With you focused on military campaigns, he would effectively control domestic policy. And if the war went badly, if you were killed in battle, he would be in position to claim the throne." Alexander finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "My God, he's been planning to murder me. Not just you. This letter mentions other targets. Your mother, key supporters of the peace treaty, anyone who might oppose his rise to power." Alexander sank into a chair, the weight of betrayal evident in every line of his body. "I trusted him. He was one of my father's closest advisors, someone I looked up to. Betrayal is always hardest when it comes from those we trust," Cassius said gently. "But now that we know the truth, we can act to stop him." "How?" "He has supporters among the nobility, allies in the military. If we move against him without absolute proof—" "We have proof," Cassius pointed out, holding up the letter. "We have a letter that could have been forged, found under suspicious circumstances by investigators from the very kingdom it exonerates." Alexander shook his head. "Blackwood will claim it's a Valdris fabrication designed to sow discord in our ranks. Then we need more evidence. Something that can't be dismissed or explained away. Or," Alexander said slowly, "we need to catch him in the act." The plan they developed was dangerous, but elegant in its simplicity. Using the information in the intercepted letter, they would anticipate Blackwood's next move, an attack on a key border fortress that would force Astoria to respond militarily. But instead of allowing the attack to proceed, they would be waiting with forces from both kingdoms, ready to capture the conspirators and expose the truth. "It's risky," Alara said when they presented the plan to her and King Aldrich. "If something goes wrong, if Blackwood escapes or manages to turn the situation to his advantage, then we'll be no worse off than we are now," Alexander replied. "But if we succeed, we'll have proof of his treachery that no one can deny. And if he has allies we haven't identified, if this conspiracy goes deeper than we suspect, then we'll deal with that when we come to it," Cassius said. "But we can't let fear of the unknown prevent us from acting on what we know." The debate continued for hours, with advisors from both kingdoms weighing the risks and benefits of the proposed operation. In the end, it was Alexander who made the decision. "We proceed with the plan," he announced. "The risk of inaction is greater than the risk of action. If we allow Blackwood to continue his schemes, more innocent people will die, and our kingdoms will be drawn into a war that serves no one but him." "Very well," Aldrich agreed reluctantly. "But we do this together, with forces from both kingdoms. If this goes wrong, we'll face the consequences together as well." The fortress of Ironhold sat on a strategic hill overlooking the main pass between the two kingdoms, its ancient walls scarred by centuries of conflict. It was here that Blackwood planned to stage his final provocation, an attack that would be blamed on Valdris forces and would force Astoria to declare war. Cassius and Alexander crouched in the pre-dawn darkness, watching as the conspirators moved into position. There were more of them than expected, not just hired mercenaries but actual Astorian soldiers, men who had been turned against their own kingdom by promises of wealth and power. 30 men, Alexander whispered, his voice tight with anger. 30 of my own soldiers willing to betray their oaths for gold. Betrayal is a poison that spreads, Cassius replied quietly, but it can be cured if we act decisively. They waited until the attack began, allowing the conspirators to reveal themselves fully before springing their trap. The battle was brief but vicious. with the trapped mercenaries fighting desperately once they realized they had been discovered. Cassius found himself fighting alongside his son, their movements complementing each other with an instinctive harmony that spoke of shared blood and natural ability. Alexander was skilled with a sword, his technique polished and his courage unquestionable, but it was his tactical awareness that impressed Cassius most. The way he anticipated enemy movements, positioned his forces for maximum advantage, adapted to changing circumstances with the fluid grace of a born commander. When the fighting ended, Lord Blackwood lay dead among his conspirators, his treachery exposed for all to see. The surviving mercenaries were taken prisoner, their confessions providing the final proof needed to vindicate both kingdoms and preserve the peace. "It's over," Alexander said as they surveyed the aftermath. "The conspiracy is broken, the truth is revealed." "This conspiracy is broken," Cassius corrected. "But there will be others. There are always those who profit from conflict, who see war as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. Then we'll face them as we faced this one. Together." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Together, not just as allies but as something more, something that neither of them could quite name, but both of them felt. "Alexander," Cassius began, then stopped. How could he tell his son the truth? How could he explain 18 years of absence, 18 years of believing he was dead? "Yes? I want you to know that working with you these past days has been an honor. You're going to be a great king." "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." Alexander hesitated, then continued. "General, I know this might sound strange, but I feel like I've known you my whole life. Like we're connected somehow." "Connected? I can't explain it. But from the moment we met, I felt like I could trust you completely. Like you understood me in a way that few people do." Cassius felt his heart breaking. His son was reaching out to him, sensing the bond between them even without knowing its true nature. And he couldn't respond, couldn't acknowledge what they both felt without destroying everything Alara had built to protect him. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "it's simply the recognition of shared values. We both believe in honor, in duty, in protecting those who cannot protect themselves." "Perhaps," Alexander agreed, but his expression suggested he suspected there was more to it than that. The journey back to the capital was subdued, with both kingdoms' representatives processing the implications of what they had discovered. The immediate crisis was over, but the underlying tensions that had made the conspiracy possible remained. "What happens now?" Cassius asked Alara as they rode side by side, their conversation private despite the crowds around them. "Now Alexander takes the throne, officially this time. The regency ends on his 18th birthday, which is tomorrow. And the peace between our kingdoms? Stronger than ever, I hope. The conspiracy's exposure has shown both sides that we have more to gain from cooperation than conflict. And us. What happens to us?" Alara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Nothing happens to us, Cassius. Nothing can happen to us. Even after everything we've shared these past days, even after seeing how well you and I work together, how naturally Alexander and I connect, especially because of that." Her voice was pained but firm. "Don't you see? The more time you spend with him, the more obvious the resemblance becomes. The way you move, the way you think, the way you approach problems, you're too much alike for it to be coincidence. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time for the truth to come out." "And destroy his legitimacy? Throw both kingdoms into chaos?" "Cassius Alexander is about to be crowned king. If questions arise about his parentage now, if there's any doubt about his right to rule, there wouldn't be doubt. He's proven himself these past days, shown that he has the wisdom and courage to lead. Proven himself to us, yes, but the nobles who opposed the peace treaty, the ones who wanted war, they would seize on any excuse to challenge his authority. A bastard son of a vampire general would give them exactly the weapon they need." Cassius knew she was right, but the knowledge didn't make it any easier to accept. "So I'm supposed to just walk away? Pretend these past days never happened? You're supposed to do what's best for your son even if it breaks your heart. And what about what's best for you? For us? There is no us, Cassius. There can't be. Too much has changed. Too much time has passed. Has it? Because when I look at you, when I see the woman you've become, I fall in love with you all over again. And when I see you looking at me, I know you feel the same way. What I feel doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters." "No," Alara said firmly. What matters is Alexander's future, the stability of both our kingdoms, the peace that thousands of people depend on. What matters is being responsible adults who put duty before desire. I've spent a century putting duty before desire. I've sacrificed everything for responsibility and honor and the greater good. When do I get to choose happiness? When choosing happiness doesn't mean destroying other people's lives. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the weight of unspoken words and impossible choices hanging between them like a sword. The coronation of King Alexander I of Astoria was a magnificent affair, with representatives from dozens of kingdoms gathering to witness the young prince's ascension to the throne. Cassius stood with the Valdres delegation, watching as his son knelt before the archbishop and accepted the crown that would define the rest of his life. Alexander looked every inch a king as he rose, the ancient crown of Astoria gleaming on his dark hair, his storm-gray eyes serious with the weight of new responsibility. When he spoke the traditional words of the coronation oath, his voice carried clearly through the cathedral, strong and sure and full of conviction. I, Alexander, do solemnly swear to govern the people of this kingdom of Astoria, according to their respective laws and customs. I will cause law and justice in mercy to be executed in all my judgments. I will, to the utmost of my power, maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel. I will preserve unto the bishops and clergy of this realm, and to the churches committed to their charge, all such rights and privileges as by law do or shall appertain to them. All this I promise to do. The things which I have herebefore promised, I will perform and keep. So help me God. As the cathedral erupted in cheers and the bells of the city rang out in celebration, Cassius felt a complex mixture of pride and sorrow. His son was now a king, a ruler in his own right, but the distance between them had never felt greater. After the ceremony, there was a grand feast in the palace with nobles and dignitaries from across the known world gathering to honor the new king. Cassius found himself seated at the high table as part of the Valdres delegation, close enough to observe Alexander, but far enough to maintain the pretense of mere diplomatic courtesy. "Your Majesty," King Aldrich said, raising his goblet in a toast, "may your reign be long and prosperous, and may the peace between our kingdoms endure for generations to come." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Alexander replied, his own goblet raised. "I pledge that Astoria will honor the treaties signed by my predecessors and work always for the betterment of both our peoples." The formal toasts continued, but Cassius found his attention drawn to the way Alexander carried himself, the confidence in his bearing, the careful attention he paid to each speaker, the way he managed to be both regal and approachable. These were qualities that couldn't be taught. They came from within, from the kind of character that was shaped by both nature and nurture. "He's remarkable," said a voice beside him, and Cassius turned to see Queen Mother Ilara taking the seat that had been left vacant. "Your Majesty," he said, rising slightly in acknowledgement. "Please sit. We're family here after all." Her smile was warm but strained, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "It's been a long day, a momentous one. You must be very proud." "I am, though I confess I'm also terrified. He's so young to bear such responsibility. He's ready for it. These past days have shown that he has the wisdom and courage to lead." "Yes, they have." Ilara's voice was soft, thoughtful. "You've been good for him, you know. Working with you, learning from you. It's given him confidence in his own abilities. He didn't need me for that. The qualities that make him a good king were already there, perhaps. But having a mentor, someone who understood the burden of command, that made all the difference." She paused, then added quietly, "He's going to miss you when you leave." "And when will that be?" "Tomorrow. King Aldrich has already made the arrangements. The diplomatic mission is complete and there's no reason for the delegation to remain longer." "No reason," Cassius repeated, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Cassius," Ilara began, then stopped, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I know this is difficult, but it's for the best." "For whom?" "For everyone. For Alexander. For both our kingdoms. For you?" She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on her son as he spoke with a group of foreign ambassadors. "For me, the best thing would be to run away with you tonight and never look back. But I'm not a young girl anymore, free to follow her heart wherever it leads. I'm a queen mother, a guardian of the peace, a woman with responsibilities that extend far beyond my own desires. And I'm a general who spent a century fighting for a future that included you. A man who's just discovered he has a son he can never acknowledge. A vampire who's learned that some victories cost more than defeats. I know, and I'm sorry. More sorry than you'll ever know. But Cassius, if we're discovered, if the truth comes out, then we'll face the consequences together. The consequences won't fall on us alone. They'll fall on Alexander, on both our kingdoms, on thousands of innocent people who depend on the stability we've built. Before Cassius could respond, Alexander himself approached their table, his face bright with the joy of the day. "Mother General Nightfall," he said, offering a slight bow. "I hope you're enjoying the celebration." "It's magnificent, Your Majesty," Cassius replied, rising to his feet. "A fitting tribute to your ascension." "Thank you. Though I have to admit I'll be glad when the formalities are over and I can get back to the real work of ruling." "Eager to begin?" "Eager to prove myself worthy of the trust my people have placed in me." Alexander's expression grew serious. "General, I understand you'll be leaving tomorrow with King Aldrich's delegation." "Yes, Your Majesty. My duties call me back to Valdris." "Of course, but I hope this won't be the last time we work together. The investigation these past days has shown me the value of cooperation between our kingdoms. I'm sure there will be other opportunities for collaboration." "I hope so." In fact, Alexander hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "General, would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to discuss privately." Cassius glanced at Alara, seeing the warning in her eyes, but he couldn't refuse without seeming rude. "Of course, Your Majesty." They made their way out onto one of the palace's many balconies, where the sounds of the celebration faded to a distant murmur. The night was clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "General," Alexander began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to phrase what he wanted to say. "Yes, Your Majesty. I want to thank you for everything you've done these past days, for the way you've guided me, for—" He paused, then continued with obvious difficulty, "for being the father figure I never had." The words hit Cassius like a physical blow. "Your Majesty, please let me finish. I know it might seem strange given that we've only known each other for a few days, but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you. Someone who understands the burden of command, who's faced the kinds of decisions that keep you awake at night. Alexander, I know you have your own duties, your own kingdom to serve, but I want you to know that if you ever need anything, if there's ever any way I can repay what you've given me, you have only to ask." Cassius felt tears burning behind his eyes. His son was offering him everything he could: friendship, respect, gratitude, a place in his life, without knowing that he was speaking to his own father. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "serving alongside you has been one of the greatest honors of my life. You're going to be a magnificent king." "Do you really think so?" "I know so. Your people are fortunate to have you. And I'm fortunate to have had the chance to learn from you." Alexander extended his hand. "Until we meet again, General." Cassius took his son's hand, memorizing the feel of it, the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of sword practice and hard work. "Until we meet again, Your Majesty." As they shook hands, Alexander's eyes searched his face with an intensity that made Cassius's heart race. For a moment he thought his son might voice the questions that were clearly forming in his mind. But then the moment passed, and Alexander stepped back with a formal bow. "Safe travels, General. May the road rise up to meet you. And may you find the strength to bear the crown with honor, Your Majesty." The next morning dawned gray and cold, with a mist rising from the river that seemed to match Cassius's mood. He stood in the palace courtyard, watching as the Valdris delegation prepared for departure, his heart heavy with the weight of leaving. "Ready?" King Aldrich asked, approaching with obvious sympathy in his expression. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Cassius, I know this is difficult. If there were any other way—" "There isn't. We both know that." Cassius swung up into his saddle, his movements automatic despite the turmoil in his mind. "The peace must be preserved, regardless of personal cost. Still, it seems cruel that fate would bring you back to her only to tear you away again. Perhaps that's the point. Perhaps some lessons can only be learned through loss." They were preparing to ride out when Alexander appeared, still dressed in his coronation robes but moving with obvious urgency. "General," he called out, approaching Cassius's horse, "I'm glad I caught you." "Your Majesty," Shouldn't you be in council meetings? The council can wait. I wanted to give you this. Alexander pulled out a small object wrapped in silk. A token of my gratitude. Cassius unwrapped the silk to reveal a signet ring bearing the royal arms of Astoria. It was beautifully crafted, obviously valuable, but more than that, it was a symbol of trust, of friendship, of the bond that had formed between them. Your Majesty, I can't accept this. You can and you will. It's not just a gift, it's a promise. Wherever you go, whatever you face, remember that you have an ally in Astoria. You have a friend who will never forget what you've done for him. Cassius slipped the ring onto his finger, feeling the weight of it like a physical connection to his son. Thank you, Your Majesty. I'll treasure it always. And I'll treasure the memory of these past days. The lessons you've taught me, the example you've set, they'll guide me for the rest of my reign. Then my time here has been well spent. As the delegation began to move out, Cassius caught sight of Alara watching from an upper window. Even at this distance, he could see the tears on her cheeks, the way her hand pressed against the glass as if trying to reach him. He raised his hand in a final farewell, and she nodded once before stepping back into the shadows. Goodbye, my love, he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him, but needing to say the words anyway. The ride back to Valdres took 3 days, but it felt like a lifetime. Cassius found himself reliving every moment of his time in Astoria, every conversation with Alexander, every stolen glance with Alara. He thought about the choices that had led them to this point, the sacrifices that had been made, the prices that had been paid. You're brooding, King Aldrich observed as they made camp on the second night. I'm thinking. About her? Or about him? Both. Neither. I don't know. Cassius stared into the campfire, watching the flames dance in the darkness. How do you walk away from everything you've ever wanted? The same way you walked toward it in the first place, one step at a time, with faith that you're doing the right thing. And if I'm not, if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life, then you'll live with the consequences just as you've lived with all the other difficult choices you've made. Aldrich's voice was gentle but firm. Cassius, I've known you for over a century. I've seen you face impossible odds, make decisions that would break lesser men, carry burdens that would crush anyone else. This is just another burden, another choice. You'll bear it because you have to, because that's who you are. A man who sacrifices his own happiness for duty. A man who understands that sometimes the greatest love is letting go. That night, Cassius dreamed of a different life. A life where he had never gone to war, where he had married Alara as planned, where he had been there to raise Alexander from birth. In his dream, they were a family. Not perfect, but complete. He woke with tears on his cheeks and the taste of regret bitter in his mouth. The third day brought them to the borders of Valdres, where the familiar sight of his homeland's mountains should have brought comfort. Instead, Cassius felt only emptiness, as if he were returning to a place that no longer held any meaning for him. Welcome home, Aldrich said as they passed through the border checkpoint. Home, Cassius repeated, but the word felt hollow. How could this be home when his heart remained in Astoria, with a woman he could never have and a son he could never claim? The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of duty and routine. Cassius threw himself into his work, reorganizing the army, updating defense strategies, training new recruits. He told himself that staying busy would help, that purpose would fill the void left by loss. It didn't work. Every night he found himself staring at Alexander's ring, remembering his son's words, wondering what kind of king he was becoming. Every morning he woke hoping for news from Astoria, some word that would tell him how Alara was faring, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought of him. The news, when it finally came, was not what he expected. General, Captain Marcus burst into his office without ceremony, his face pale with urgency. We've received word from Astoria. There's been an attempt on the king's life. Cassius was on his feet instantly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Is he alive? Yes, but barely. Poisoned at a state dinner. The physicians aren't certain he'll survive. Who was responsible? Unknown. But General, there's more. Queen Mother Alara has been arrested on suspicion of treason. The world seemed to tilt around him. What? The poison was delivered in wine from her private cellars. The investigators found evidence in her chambers, correspondence with enemies of the kingdom, plans for Alexander's assassination. That's impossible. Alara would never. The evidence is compelling, sir. And there are those in the Astorian court who remember her previous loyalties, who question whether her marriage to King Richard was truly a conversion or merely a convenient cover. Cassius felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. Someone was framing Alara, using her past connection to Valdris to make her a scapegoat for their own crimes. And with Alexander fighting for his life, there was no one to protect her. "Prepare my horse," he ordered. "Sir, I'm going to Astoria." "General, that would be inadvisable. If you're seen there now, if you're connected to the Queen Mother in any way, it could be seen as proof of the conspiracy." "I don't care." Cassius was already reaching for his sword, his mind racing through possibilities and plans. "My son is dying and the woman I love is being framed for his murder. I won't stand by and do nothing." "Your son?" Marcus's eyes widened with understanding. "General, is Prince Alexander?" "Yes. And if you repeat that to anyone, I'll kill you myself." Cassius's voice was deadly quiet. "But first, you're going to help me save them both." The ride to Astoria took 2 days of hard travel, with Cassius pushing his horse to its limits and stopping only when absolutely necessary. He traveled alone, despite Marcus's protests, knowing that a small group would move faster and attract less attention than a full military escort. He reached the capital as the sun was setting, the city's streets unusually quiet for the evening hour. News of the king's poisoning had clearly spread, and the people were staying indoors, uncertain what the future might hold. Cassius made his way to the palace through back alleys and servants' passages, using knowledge gained during his recent visit to avoid the main entrances where guards would be watching for exactly this kind of infiltration. He needed to see Alexander first, to assess his condition and determine what could be done. The royal chambers were heavily guarded, but Cassius had not spent a century as a general without learning how to move unseen when necessary. He slipped past the sentries like a shadow, his vampire abilities allowing him to move with inhuman silence and grace. Alexander lay in his bed like a figure carved from marble, his face pale and still, his breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. Cassius approached slowly, his heart breaking at the sight of his son brought so low. "Alexander," he whispered, taking the young king's hand in his own. For a moment, there was no response. Then Alexander's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Cassius with obvious difficulty. "General?" His voice was barely audible. "What? How are you here?" "I came as soon as I heard." "How do you feel?" "Like I'm dying." Alexander's attempt at a smile was heartbreaking. "The physicians say the poison is unlike anything they've seen before. Something from the old world, designed specifically to kill slowly and painfully." "Who did this to you?" "I don't know, but they're saying it was my mother." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "They're saying she tried to kill me. And what do you say?" "I say it's impossible. My mother loves me more than her own life. She would never..." He trailed off, overcome by weakness. "Then we need to find out who really did this." "We? General, you shouldn't be here. If you're caught, let me worry about that. Right now, the only thing that matters is keeping you alive and proving your mother's innocence. The evidence against her is overwhelming. Letters, poison in her chambers, witnesses who saw her near the wine before dinner, all of which could be fabricated by someone with access to the palace and knowledge of court routines." Cassius's mind was already working through the possibilities. "Who benefits from your death and her disgrace?" "Lord Pemberton, perhaps. He's next in line for the throne if I die without an heir. Or Duke Blackwood's son. He's been vocal about his opposition to the peace treaty. We need proof, real evidence, not planted documents and convenient witnesses." "How? I can barely stand, let alone conduct an investigation." "Then I'll do it for you." Cassius squeezed his son's hand gently. "Trust me, Alexander, I won't let them destroy you or your mother." "Why?" Alexander's eyes searched his face with desperate intensity. "Why would you risk everything for us?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of truth that couldn't be spoken. Cassius looked down at his son, pale, vulnerable, fighting for his life, and felt his resolve crystallize. "Because," he said quietly, "some things are worth any risk." The investigation took 3 days of careful work, with Cassius moving through the palace like a ghost, gathering evidence and following leads while avoiding the guards who were searching for him. What he found confirmed his suspicions. The plot against Alexander was elaborate and well-planned, involving several high-ranking nobles who saw the young king's progressive policies as a threat to their traditional power. The real mastermind, however, was someone he hadn't expected. "Lord Chancellor Pemberton," he said, stepping out of the shadows as the elderly man made his way through the palace's private corridors. Pemberton spun around, his face going white with shock and fear. "General Nightfall, what are you doing here?" "Investigating the attempted murder of my king, and discovering some very interesting facts about who really wants him dead." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? The poison used was Shadowbane, a rare toxin from the Eastern Kingdoms that you've been importing for months under the guise of medicinal research. The letters found in Queen Alara's chambers were written on paper from your private stock, with ink that matches the batch in your study. And the witnesses who claim to have seen her near the wine, all of them owe you money or favors." Pemberton's composure cracked completely. "You can't prove any of that." "I already have. The question now is whether you confess and throw yourself on the king's mercy, or whether I drag you before the court and let them decide your fate." "You don't understand," Pemberton said desperately. "Alexander is destroying everything our ancestors built. The peace treaty, the alliance with Valdris, his plans to give rights to commoners. He's weakening the kingdom. He's strengthening it. But you're too blinded by tradition to see that. And you're too blinded by sentiment. Yes, I know who you really are, General. I know whose bastard sits on our throne." The words hit Cassius like a physical blow. "What? Did you think it was a secret? The timing of the Queen's pregnancy? The child's resemblance to you? The way she's always favored Valdris in diplomatic matters?" Pemberton's smile was cruel. "I've known for years. And when the time was right, I planned to use that knowledge to remove both the bastard and his whore mother from power. But Alexander survived the poison. A temporary setback. There are other ways to eliminate a king, especially one whose legitimacy can be questioned." Cassius felt rage building in his chest, the careful control he'd maintained for days finally snapping. "You're confessing to treason. I'm confessing to patriotism, to protecting Astoria from the corruption of vampire blood and foreign influence. Then you can confess it to the king himself." The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive. Pemberton, despite his age, was no match for a vampire general with over a century of combat experience. When the palace guards finally arrived, drawn by the sounds of struggle, they found Cassius standing over the unconscious chancellor with evidence of the conspiracy spread around them. "General Nightfall," Captain Harrison of the Royal Guard said, his hand on his sword, but his expression uncertain. "You're under arrest for saving your king's life and exposing the real traitors," Cassius interrupted. "Check the evidence, Captain. Read the documents. Question the witnesses. You'll find that Lord Pemberton orchestrated this entire plot. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and if you want to save King Alexander's life, you'll get this information to the royal physicians immediately. The antidote to Shadowbane poison is complex, but it can be prepared if they know what they're dealing with." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity, as the palace erupted into controlled chaos. Physicians rushed to prepare the antidote, while guards rounded up Pemberton's co-conspirators. Cassius found himself under house arrest in the guest quarters, officially a prisoner, but treated with the respect due to someone who had just saved the kingdom. It was there that Alara found him. "Cassius." She stood in the doorway like a vision, her face pale but her eyes bright with tears of relief. "They told me what you did, how you saved Alexander, how you proved my innocence. I couldn't let them destroy you, either of you." She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, throwing herself into his arms with a desperation that spoke of days of fear and uncertainty. "I thought I was going to die. I thought they were going to execute me for something I would never do. I would never have let that happen. You risked everything. Your life, your position, your honor, all for us. For my family," he corrected, holding her tightly. "For the woman I love, and the son I've never been able to claim." "Cassius," she began, but he silenced her with a kiss that held a century of longing, of regret, of desperate love. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their faces flushed with emotion and desire. "What happens now?" she whispered. "I don't know. The truth about Alexander's parentage is out. Pemberton made sure of that before he was arrested. There will be questions, challenges to his legitimacy, political upheaval. And us? I don't know that either. But Alara, I'm tired of sacrificing our happiness for other people's expectations. I'm tired of letting duty and politics dictate who we can love and how we can live. The kingdoms will adapt. They'll have to, because I'm not walking away from you again. I'm not abandoning my son when he needs me most. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Before Alara could respond, a commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of visitors. Alexander appeared in the doorway, supported by 2 guards but clearly on the road to recovery. His color was better, his breathing stronger, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence that marked him as his father's son. "General," he said, his voice still weak but steady, "I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing, Your Majesty. I did what any loyal subject would do." "Did you? Or did you do what any father would do?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Alexander's eyes moved between Cassius and Alara, taking in their proximity, their obvious emotional connection, the way they seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. "Alexander," Alara began, but he held up a hand. "Mother, I've suspected for years. The timing, the resemblance, the way you always spoke of my birth father with such love and pain." He looked directly at Cassius. "You're him, aren't you? You're my real father." Cassius felt the weight of 18 years of secrets pressing down on him. He could lie, could maintain the fiction that had protected them all for so long, or he could finally tell his son the truth. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." Alexander nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd always known. "I thought so. From the moment we met, I felt connected to you, like I'd been waiting my whole life to find you." "Alexander, I know this is difficult to understand. Is it? You're a war hero, a man of honor and courage. My mother loved you enough to wait 15 years for your return. You risked everything to save my life and prove her innocence." Alexander's smile was weak but genuine. "If I had to choose a father, I couldn't have chosen better. But your legitimacy, your right to rule, comes from the crown, not from bloodlines. The nobles may question my parentage, but they can't question my actions. I've proven myself as a king, and I'll continue to do so. And the peace between our kingdoms will be stronger than ever now that we're truly family." Alexander looked between his parents with obvious affection. "Though I suppose this means I'll have to get used to having a vampire for a father." "If you'll have me," Cassius said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been waiting 18 years for you to come home," Alexander replied. "I'm not about to turn you away now." The political upheaval that followed was intense, but manageable. Some nobles questioned Alexander's legitimacy, but his decisive handling of the crisis and the obvious loyalty of his people carried the day. The revelation that he was the son of the legendary General Nightfall actually enhanced his reputation in some circles, adding a romantic element to his story that captured the public imagination. The peace between Valdris and Astoria was indeed strengthened by the family connection, with both kingdoms benefiting from closer cooperation and shared resources. King Aldrich, after some initial shock, embraced the situation with characteristic pragmatism, recognizing the political advantages of having a close ally on Astoria's throne. But for Cassius, the political implications mattered less than the personal ones. After a century of war and 20 years of separation, he finally had his family back. "Do you ever regret it?" Alara asked one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, Alexander having finally convinced his council to accept his parents' relationship. "Regret what?" "The years we lost. The time we can never get back." Cassius considered the question, thinking of all the moments he'd missed. Alexander's first steps, his first words, the countless small milestones that made up a childhood. The pain of those losses would never fully heal. "I regret the time we lost," he said finally. "But I don't regret the choices that led us here. The war had to be fought. The peace had to be preserved. Alexander had to be protected. We did what we had to do. And now we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time. The rest of our very long lives," she corrected with a smile. "I've been thinking about that, about what it means to love someone who will live forever. And what does it mean? It means we have eternity to get it right." As they walked hand in hand through the moonlit garden, Cassius felt a peace he hadn't experienced in over a century. The war was over, his family was safe, and the future stretched ahead of them bright with possibility. He had returned from 100 years of war to find that everything he'd fought for had changed. But in the end, love had proven stronger than duty, family had triumphed over politics, and the bonds that truly mattered had endured despite time and distance and the weight of impossible choices. Some victories, he realized, were worth waiting a century to achieve. What an absolutely epic journey from battlefield to family reunion. I'm still emotional from that final scene where Alexander finally learns the truth about his parentage and embraces both his parents with such grace and maturity. The way Cassius had to choose between duty and love, only to discover that sometimes the greatest duty is to the family you never knew you had. That hit me right in the heart. And can we talk about Alara's impossible position? 20 years of protecting a secret that could have destroyed kingdoms, raising a son alone while carrying the weight of a love that never died. What did you think of Alexander's reaction to learning Cassius was his father? Did his immediate acceptance feel realistic, or would you have expected more conflict? If you loved this sweeping tale of love transcending time, duty, and political intrigue, please hit that subscribe button. I have so many more incredible stories waiting for you. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Cassius made the right choice in revealing himself? Or should some secrets stay buried? And here's something that's been haunting me. Was the century of separation necessary for them to truly appreciate what they had? Or was it just cruel fate? Next week, I'm bringing you another breathtaking supernatural romance. Immortal assassin retires after 500 years. His first target was his future wife. Trust me, you won't want to miss that emotional masterpiece.